No year is 479 BCE. The fires are still burning, not on the battlefield, but in the memories of those who survived. History will tell you that Greece won. It will tell you about heroism, about strategy, about the triumph of freedom over tyranny. But history has a habit of speaking with a selective voice. It remembers the generals. It remembers the battles. It remembers the victories carved into marble. What it forgets are the people who vanished in the silence after the war. Tonight, we remember them. This is not the story of the men who fought. This is the story of the women who were taken, and how an empire tried to erase a civilization, not by killing its people, but by absorbing them. Welcome to Crimson Histories. The shoreline of Attica is quiet now. Months ago, this coast was chaos. Ships burned in the Straits of Salamis. Oars snapped like bones. Men drowned in armor too heavy to remove. The Persian fleet, once the largest the world had ever seen, was shattered. King Xerxes had crossed the Hellespont with an army that seemed infinite. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, engineers, priests, scribes, administrators. Because the Persian Empire did not conquer like other empires, it conquered with paperwork. Every city that fell was recorded. Every harvest counted. Every surviving civilian cataloged. Victory for Persia was never only military. It was administrative, and administration requires inventory. When Athens burned in 480 BCE, the flames were visible for miles. Temples collapsed. Homes turned to ash. Statues melted into shapeless bronze. But the most valuable spoils of the city were not gold or silver. They were human. When Persian officials entered a captured city, they asked three questions. Who can work? Who can fight? Who can be taken? The first two mattered for the present. The third mattered for the future. Across the Greek world, refugees fled ahead of the Persian advance. Families hid in caves. Children were lowered into wells. Villagers vanished into the mountains. But not everyone escaped. The elderly could not run. The injured could not travel. And thousands made the fatal decision to stay behind. They believed the war would pass quickly. That surrender meant survival. They were wrong. In the Persian administrative language, there was a word, baraftana, the harvest. It did not refer to crops, it referred to people. After a city was subdued, specialized units entered the ruins. They were not soldiers, they were collectors. Their job was to gather the living. Imagine the scene. A burned city still smoking, walls cracked open, bodies in the streets, and through the ash, officials carrying wax tablets, writing, recording, sorting. Because the Persian Empire did not see captives as prisoners, it saw them as resources. Men were separated first. Young and strong men were marched away for labor battalions. Others were executed to prevent future rebellions. But the most systematic process was reserved for women and children. Because they represented something more valuable than labor, they represented continuity. Girls under 12 were grouped together. They would be raised in Persian households, given Persian names, taught Persian customs. Within a generation, they would forget Greece existed. Women over 30 were assigned to labor estates across the empire, agricultural colonies, textile workshops, mining operations. Life expectancy in these places was short, but the empire measured success in decades, not lifetimes. The most attention was given to those between 13 and 25. The empire called them transferable assets. At processing camps along the coast of Asia Minor, tents stretched for miles. Thousands of captives waited in lines that never seemed to move. Inside the tents were scribes. Their tools were simple: clay tablets, styluses, scales. Every captive was examined. Teeth, hair, height, scars, health, each detail pressed into wet clay. That would harden and survive for millennia. Records of human lives reduced to inventory entries. One tablet discovered in the ruins of Persepolis reads, "Shipment received, 120 Ionian females, Ages 14 to 22. Condition acceptable. Condition acceptable. Two words that erased entire lives. What happened next was not chaos, it was policy. The Persian royal court maintained an institution often misunderstood today, the royal harem. Modern imagination fills it with luxury and indulgence, but in reality, it was political. A controlled environment where the daughters of conquered peoples were integrated into imperial society. The goal was not pleasure, it was assimilation. Empires face a permanent problem. How do you control distant lands filled with people who do not speak your language, worship your gods, or trust your rule? You create a generation that belongs to both worlds. Children of mixed heritage could act as translators, administrators, governors, bridges between conqueror and conquered. This was not an accident. It was long-term strategy. Ships left the Greek coast in steady waves. Each carried human cargo eastward, to Sardis, to Babylon, to Susa. Cities so vast they felt unreal to a girl from a Greek village. Columns taller than temples, gardens filled with unfamiliar plants, air thick with incense and foreign languages. And in the center of it all, the palace complex, where new identities were assigned. Names were the first thing to disappear. A girl called Helena became Artazostre. A girl called Marine became Parasatis. A new name meant a new life. A new language followed. Greek was discouraged. Persian was rewarded. Memory became dangerous. Forgetting became survival. Resistance did not vanish immediately. Many captives refused food, refused to speak, refused to cooperate. The empire had a solution for this too: isolation. Weeks alone, months without familiar voices. Humans are social creatures. Silence breaks us faster than chains. Eventually, most spoke. And once they spoke, the process accelerated. Training began. Persian etiquette, Persian dress, Persian rituals, how to bow, how to serve, how to exist inside a court where everything followed strict hierarchy. Some captives spent years in this stage. By the time they emerged, their past felt distant, dreamlike, almost imaginary. Not all survived the process. Records mention disciplinary labor units, textile workshops where women worked 14 hours a day, minimal rations, no contact with others from their homeland. Cause of death in the records is always the same: exhaustion, a word that hides suffering behind bureaucracy. But many did survive, and survival came with transformation. Some became servants in noble households. Others rose higher: secondary wives, court attendants, mothers of imperial children. And here the strategy revealed its true power, because children reshape history faster than armies. A child born in Persia would grow up speaking Persian, learning Persian history, serving Persian kings, even if his mother once sang Greek lullabies. Within 2 generations, the memory of Greece faded, not erased violently, simply diluted, until it disappeared. This was the empire's quiet victory. No battles, no monuments, just a slow shift in identity. And the world moved on, because history prefers stories of heroes, not stories of disappearance. But not everyone stayed. Years later, a few women returned to Greece, freed by owners, ransomed by families, or escaped. They imagined home would welcome them. They imagined wrong. Greek society struggled with their return. They spoke differently, dressed differently, sometimes brought children with them. Children born in Persia. The cities did not know where to place them. Victims, or reminders of defeat. Many families refused to accept them. Citizenship denied. Homes closed. The war had ended, but for them, exile continued. Ancient writers mention them only briefly. The silent women, a phrase that appears and then disappears from history. No epics, no statues, no memorials, just silence. And silence is the most complete form of erasure, because what is not remembered feels like it never existed. But clay remembers. Stone remembers. Buried inscriptions whisper across millennia, proof that these lives were real, proof that victory always has a price. And this is only the beginning of the story, because the Persian strategy did not end with Xerxes. It continued for decades, quietly reshaping the ancient world and changing the fate of thousands more. In the next chapter, we follow the journey east, to the heart of the empire, to the city of Susa, where assimilation became an industry, and where the daughters of Greece were transformed into something entirely new. Chapter 2. The Road to Susa. The journey east did not happen in a single voyage. It happened in stages. Convoys moved slowly across the empire like blood through veins. From the Aegean coast to Lydia, from Lydia to Mesopotamia, from Mesopotamia to the royal capitals of Persia. Thousands of kilometers, months of travel. For many captives, this was the longest journey they would ever survive. The first destination was Sardis, the former capital of the Lydian kingdom, now a Persian administrative hub. To a Greek captive, Sardis felt like the edge of the known world. Languages blended in the streets. Greek merchants argued beside Persian officials. Lydian goldsmiths worked under Babylonian overseers. Empires create cities that feel like crossroads of reality, and Sardis was one of them. Here, the captives were reorganized. Some were kept in Western Anatolia permanently. Their labor needed close to newly conquered Greek territories. But the most valuable captives continued east. They were the ones selected for imperial integration, the ones destined for the royal courts. Caravans replaced ships. Long lines of people walking dusty imperial roads, guarded by soldiers who saw them not as enemies, but as state property. The Persian royal road stretched over 2,500 kilometers. It was the ancient world's greatest highway, built for messengers and armies, now used for human cargo. Travel was relentless. Heat during the day, cold during the night, dust that filled lungs and coated skin. Some captives died along the road, their names never recorded. The tablets simply adjusted the numbers. Losses during transit, acceptable. But survival meant arrival, and arrival meant transformation. Weeks later, the land began to change. Mountains gave way to vast plains. The air grew warmer, the languages unfamiliar. And then, rising from the horizon like a mirage, Babylon. To a Greek villager, Babylon felt impossible. Walls so wide, chariots could race across them. Gates covered in blue glazed brick. Golden lions staring down from towers. It looked less like a city and more like a declaration. This is what power looks like. Some captives remained here. Babylon needed workers, servants, artisans. But others continued further east, toward the true heart of imperial authority, toward Susa. Susa was not merely a city, it was a symbol, one of the great capitals of the Persian kings, a place where decisions affecting millions were made, where tribute arrived from 3 continents, where the machinery of empire never stopped moving. When the first Greek captives entered Susa, they stepped into a world designed to overwhelm. Colossal columns, walls covered in colored tiles, gardens irrigated by engineered canals. Everything was deliberate, architecture as psychology. If the journey had not broken you, Susa would. New arrivals were processed again, new tablets, new records, names crossed out, new names added, identity rewritten in clay. The empire believed in layers of administration. No person entered the imperial system without documentation. Every ration issued, every garment provided, every assignment recorded. The Persian Empire trusted bureaucracy more than memory, and bureaucracy does not forget. Inside the palace complex existed a city within a city, workshops, living quarters, training halls, and deep inside, the royal women's quarters. The institution later misunderstood as the harem. Entry here marked a permanent shift in status. These women were no longer captives. They were now part of the imperial household. That did not mean freedom, it meant permanence. Life inside the palace followed strict hierarchy. At the top were royal wives of Persian noble blood. Below them, secondary wives and companions. Below them, attendants and servants drawn from across the empire. Egyptian, Babylonian, Lydian, Greek, a microcosm of conquest living under one roof. Training resumed immediately. Language immersion, religious instruction, court etiquette. Mistakes were corrected quickly, because mistakes in royal spaces had consequences. Yet the palace was not a prison in the traditional sense. It was controlled luxury, comfort as a method of control, soft fabrics, perfumed oils, regular meals, not kindness, strategy, because comfort encourages adaptation, and adaptation leads to acceptance. Years passed quietly here, and time is the most powerful force of transformation. Memories fade, accents soften, new friendships form. The past becomes distant. Some captives rose in status. Beauty, intelligence, and adaptability were noticed. Promotions were recorded in administrative tablets, higher rations, private quarters, jewelry allocations. Even affection could become a political resource. Children began to be born, and with them, the empire's long-term strategy reached maturity. These children were Persian citizens from birth, raised inside the palace, educated by imperial tutors, their mother's origins slowly becoming irrelevant. A generation was forming that belonged entirely to the empire, bridges between cultures, loyal to the throne, proof that conquest could reshape bloodlines. And outside the palace walls, the world kept turning. Greece rebuilt. Athens rose into a golden age. Philosophy, drama, democracy, a civilization flourishing, while thousands of its daughters lived lives that history rarely mentioned. Two worlds moving forward, connected by a story no one wanted to tell. In the next chapter, life inside the royal court deepens. Power struggles, jealousies, hidden influence. Because even within gilded walls, empire is never peaceful. Chapter 3. Life inside the royal court. Power inside the palace did not look like war. It looked like silence. Soft footsteps across polished stone, whispers behind curtains, glances that carried consequences. Because inside the royal household, influence was currency, and everyone was competing for survival. The palace hierarchy shaped every moment of daily life. Women were organized into ranks, each rank determining food, clothing, and living space. At the lowest levels were laborers, weavers, cooks, cleaners. Their days began before sunrise and ended after nightfall. Routine was their world, predictable, repetitive, endless. Higher ranks lived differently. Companions and secondary wives received education, reading, writing, music, diplomacy. They were expected to entertain guests, host ceremonies, and support the social fabric of the court. Because the Persian Empire valued presentation as much as power, the royal court was a stage, and everyone living inside it played a role. Rivalries formed quickly. Favor from a noble patron meant better rations, safer living quarters, and influence over others. Loss of favor meant demotion or disappearance. Jealousy was inevitable. So were alliances. Women formed quiet networks of support, shared language lessons, shared stories, shared memories of distant homes. Even in captivity, community formed, because humans always search for familiarity. Time reshaped relationships. New arrivals looked to older residents for guidance. Those who had survived years inside the palace became mentors. They taught the rules no tablet recorded: when to speak, when to remain silent, when to bow deeper than expected. Survival depended on mastering invisible rules. Festivals marked the passing of years. Persian New Year celebrations filled the palace with music and ceremony. Perfumes burned in golden bowls. Guests from distant provinces arrived bearing gifts. For a brief moment, life felt almost normal. Almost. But celebration also reminded the captives of distance. Different songs, different gods, different traditions. A world that was no longer theirs. Letters from home were rare. Communication across the empire moved slowly. Many captives never heard from their families again. Silence became permanent. Yet within the palace, influence quietly expanded. Some women became trusted advisors to their patrons, not officially, not publicly, but privately. Their knowledge of Greek language and culture became valuable. Translation, diplomacy, understanding conquered territories. Skills once tied to their old identity now gave them new purpose. And with purpose came power. Small at first, then larger. Invisible but real. Court politics never rested. Noble families competed for royal favor, governorships, military commands, marriage alliances. Every decision shaped the future of the empire. And inside the palace, information moved faster than messengers. Whispers carried across corridors before official announcements were made. Knowledge became protection. Those who understood palace dynamics survived longer. Those who didn't, faded. Years turned into decades. The first generation of captives grew older. The second generation grew up entirely inside the palace walls. Children who had never seen Greece, never heard Greek spoken in the streets, never questioned where they belonged, because to them, this was home. Education shaped their worldview, imperial history, Persian language, court etiquette. Loyalty to the king was not forced. It was taught from birth. The empire had achieved something extraordinary, not through violence, but through time. Yet memory never vanished completely. Some mothers whispered stories to their children at night, stories of distant seas, olive trees, marble temples shining in the sun, stories that sounded like myths, stories children struggled to believe were real, because the past fades when the present feels permanent. Inside the palace, life continued quietly. Routine, ceremony, strategy, decades of stability built on foundations few would ever question. Outside the palace, the world shifted again. A new generation of leaders rose in Greece, ambitious, confident, restless. They had grown up hearing stories of victory against Persia, stories of strength, stories of independence. But history moves in cycles, and the next cycle was already beginning. In the next chapter, a new Greek threat emerges in the West. A young king begins to dream of conquest, and the lives built inside the Persian court face an uncertain future. He studied to the return of war. Time does not heal empires, it reshapes them. And beneath the surface of calm decades, old tensions always return. By the mid-4th century BCE, Greece was no longer the fragile collection of city-states it had been during the Persian invasions. It had evolved, stronger, more unified, more ambitious, but also restless. In the north, a kingdom was rising, Macedon. At its center stood a young king, Alexander. He was not yet the conqueror history would remember. At this stage, he was simply a man shaped by stories. Stories of Achilles, stories of Troy, stories of Persian defeat and Greek survival. History for him was not memory, it was instruction. While the Persian Empire still stretched across continents, it had changed. Slower now, heavier, more bureaucratic. The machinery of administration still functioned, but the sharp edge of conquest had dulled. Inside Susa, life continued. The palace still operated with precision, but the world beyond its walls was shifting. Borders no longer felt permanent. Power no longer felt stable. News arrived slowly from the west. Rebellions in Greek cities, shifting alliances, growing ambitions in Macedon. The empire recorded everything, but reaction was delayed, because large systems move slowly, even when danger approaches quickly. Inside the royal household, generations had changed. The original captives were now elderly. Some had become influential figures. Others had disappeared into obscurity. Their children occupied new roles within the empire: administrators, scribes, local governors, people who no longer saw themselves as outsiders. Identity had transformed completely. Greek origins became historical footnotes, not lived reality. Yet history never fully disappears. It hides. It waits. When Alexander crossed into Asia in 334 BCE, he did not see a foreign continent. He saw inheritance, a world already shaped by Persian administration. Cities already structured for governance. Records already in place. He was not starting from nothing. He was stepping into a system already built. And that system included people, thousands of them, descendants of earlier Greek captives, living inside the empire that had once taken their ancestors. Some of them now served Persian officials. Some worked in administrative centers. Some lived inside palace networks in distant cities. Their loyalty was not simple. It had been shaped over generations. When Alexander's forces advanced eastward, they did not only face armies. They encountered a population layered with history. Greek bloodlines absorbed into Persian structure, a living contradiction. In many cities, resistance was limited, not because fear was absent, but because identity had become complex. Who was enemy? Who was home? Who belonged to which world? The empire that once relied on assimilation now faced reversal. History was beginning to move backward. Inside Susa, uncertainty spread. Couriers arrived with fragmented reports. Battles lost, cities falling, Persian forces retreating. The administrative machine continued to record events, but recording was no longer enough. Power depends not only on structure, but on momentum, and momentum was shifting. Yet inside the palace, life still maintained order. Rituals continued. Ceremonies proceeded. Daily routines did not stop. Because empires are slow to accept collapse. For those descended from Greek captives, the news carried different weight. Some felt nothing. They had no memory of Greece, no emotional connection. Others felt something they could not fully explain: a pull, a curiosity, a sense of displacement. But identity built over generations is not easily reversed. They were Persian now, even if history said otherwise. And so the empire prepared, not yet for defeat, but for adaptation. Because that is what long-lived systems do. They adjust, they survive, they continue. In the next chapter, Alexander enters the heart of Persia. Susa begins to change hands, and the legacy of centuries of assimilation faces its greatest test. Chapter 5, The Fall of Susa. Empires do not collapse in a single moment. They collapse in stages, first in borders, then in communication, then in confidence, and only at the end, in silence. By 331 BCE, the Persian Empire was no longer expanding. It was defending. Roads that once carried tribute now carried reports of retreat. Cities that once sent wealth to Susa now asked for protection. The system still existed, but it was under pressure from every direction. Alexander's advance was methodical. He did not destroy the administrative structure, he absorbed it. Persian officials were often kept in place. Local systems were reused, records preserved. Conquest through replacement, not erasure. This was what made the invasion so effective. The empire did not feel like it was being destroyed. It felt like it was being taken over from within. When Alexander approached Susa, the city did not resist. There was no final battle, no dramatic last stand, only surrender. The gates opened, and history shifted direction. Susa, once the center of imperial control, became part of a new order almost overnight. Treasuries were seized, records examined, administrators reassigned. The machinery of empire continued, just under new ownership. Inside the palace complex, confusion spread quietly. Not panic, confusion, because the structure remained intact. Only authority had changed. For many residents, daily life barely changed at first. Routines continued, food distributions remained, work assignments persisted. Empires change rulers faster than they change systems. But beneath the surface, everything was different. The flow of power had reversed, and with it, the meaning of identity began to shift again. For descendants of earlier Greek captives, the arrival of Alexander's forces created a strange tension. For generations, they had been Persian in practice. Now they were being redefined by origin. But origin was no longer memory. It was classification. Some were identified as useful intermediaries, bilingual administrators, cultural translators, logistical specialists, people shaped by two worlds, people who understood both sides of history. Others were ignored, because empires prioritize function over ancestry. Inside the palace archives, records were examined, tablets from decades earlier, lists of captives, names long forgotten in living memory. The bureaucracy of the old empire became evidence for the new one. And among those records, the traces of thousands of women resurfaced, names that had been changed, lives that had been absorbed, lineages that had continued without recognition. History does not erase cleanly. It layers, and sometimes it reveals itself unexpectedly. Susa itself did not burn. Unlike other cities, it was preserved. Alexander understood value in infrastructure, in knowledge, in administration, in continuity. But preservation is not restoration. The world that created Susa was gone. What remained was its structure without its meaning. Inside the palace, generations who had never known anything but imperial life now witnessed another transformation. The system they had grown within was being rewritten again. Language, authority, purpose, everything was shifting. And yet, life continued. Children were still born, work still happened, days still passed. Because individuals live inside empires, not above them. But something deeper was changing. A sense of permanence was disappearing. What had once felt eternal now felt temporary. For the first time in centuries, the idea of Persian dominance was no longer unquestioned. Not because it had vanished, but because it had been interrupted. And interruption changes memory. In the next chapter, we follow what remains after conquest, the surviving descendants of captives, and how identity survives when empires no longer hold it together. Chapter 6. After the Empire. When an empire falls, it does not take everything with it. It leaves fragments behind. People, languages, memories that no longer have a political center, and those fragments begin to drift. After the conquest of Susa, the Persian administrative world did not disappear instantly. It dispersed. Officials adapted. Records were preserved. Cities continued to function. Because civilization is larger than any single ruling power, but something fundamental had changed. The idea of a single, unified Persian order had been broken. What remained was a network of regions, traditions, and identities without a single anchor. For the descendants of those once taken from Greece, this created a strange reality. They lived in systems built by Persia, but now governed by a Macedonian king. And beneath both systems were echoes of Greece they had never personally known. Identity became layered, not replaced, not erased, but stacked, like sediment over time. Some families preserved fragments of old memory, a word, a song, a story told quietly at night. Not enough to define identity, but enough to prevent complete forgetting. Others lost even that. For them, origin became irrelevant. They were simply part of the world they lived in, no longer Greek, no longer purely Persian, something new, unnamed. Alexander's empire spread rapidly after Susa. Cities were founded, roads expanded, administrative systems merged. The ancient world was being reorganized at unprecedented speed. But speed creates instability, because identity cannot evolve as quickly as borders. Across former Persian territories, new elites emerged. Some were Macedonian, Some were local administrators. Some were descendants of older mixed populations. Power became a negotiation rather than a fixed inheritance. And in that negotiation, memory became optional. Not forbidden, just unnecessary. The royal palaces that once controlled vast networks of human movement now functioned as administrative centers for a new empire. The same walls, the same halls, different authority. Inside those spaces, old records still existed. Tablets from the time of Xerxes, lists of captives, administrative logs. Most were never fully read again, but they remained, because bureaucracy outlives ideology. And somewhere in those records were traces of the women who had once been taken. Their names changed, their identities absorbed, their descendants now part of multiple worlds. The question historians struggle with is not what happened to them, but what they became. Because survival inside an empire does not preserve identity unchanged. It transforms it. Some lineages continued quietly through generations, unnoticed, unrecorded in narrative history, existing only in administrative traces. A child in one century becomes a functionary in another. A functionary becomes a governor, and the origin disappears entirely. But disappearance from memory is not disappearance from existence. It is simply absence from storytelling. And storytelling is what defines history. Alexander himself understood this. He did not erase the Persian administrative system. He used it, because conquest is most effective when it preserves structure while changing authority. The world he created was not purely Greek. It was hybrid, a fusion of systems that had once been separate. And in that fusion, older identities dissolved further. Not violently, but gradually. By the time later empires rose in the same regions, the memory of the original captives had become abstract. Not personal history, but background history. And yet, traces remain. In inscriptions, in graves, in scattered records preserved by accident. Fragments of lives that once moved through imperial systems. Each fragment tells a partial truth, but together they reveal something larger. That conquest is never just about territory. It is about continuity. Who continues, who disappears, and who is redefined. And the most important transformations often happen not on battlefields, but in households, in palaces, in generations that grow up without knowing what was lost. In the next chapter, we step back from empires and focus on memory itself, how history is written, how silence is created, and why some voices survive for 2,500 years while others do not. Chapter 7. The world after conquest. When empires merge, they do not create harmony. They create layers. Old systems do not vanish. They are absorbed, reinterpreted, and reused. After Alexander's expansion, the ancient Near East entered a new phase of history. Greek language spread across administration. Local traditions remained in villages and temples. Persian systems continued beneath new leadership. Nothing was fully replaced. Everything was rearranged. Cities that once reported only to Susa now reported to multiple centers of power. Governance became decentralized, and decentralization creates complexity. In this new world, identity was no longer tied to origin alone. It was tied to function, who you served, what language you used, where you lived. These defined you more than ancestry. Descendants of earlier populations now lived in hybrid societies. Greek-speaking administrators governed Egyptian cities. Persian-trained scribes served Macedonian kings. Local elites adapted to survive within shifting systems. The world had become interconnected in a way it had never been before. But connection does not mean clarity. It often means confusion. In some regions, old cultural identities resurfaced. Temples were rebuilt. Languages revived. Local traditions reasserted themselves, but they no longer existed in isolation. They existed inside a larger imperial framework. And inside that framework, memory competed with utility. What was useful survived. What was not faded. The descendants of those once taken from Greece now lived across multiple regions, some in administrative cities, some in rural estates, some in military colonies. Few understood their full ancestry, fewer still cared, because survival had always required adaptation, and adaptation reshapes memory. Over generations, stories of origin became fragmented. A grandmother remembers a word, a father remembers a song, a child remembers nothing at all. History does not disappear in a single moment. It dissolves gradually, like ink in water. And yet, traces remain. In burial sites, in inscriptions, in administrative records that were never meant to survive centuries. Each fragment reveals something important, that populations were not static, that identities were not fixed, that empires were built on movement, and movement always leaves residue. Chapter 8, The Logic of Memory. History is not what happened. History is what was recorded, and recording is always selective. Ancient empires did not preserve personal narratives. They preserved administrative ones. Taxes, rations, movements, populations. Human lives appear in these records only when they become data. Otherwise, they remain invisible. This is why entire groups can vanish from historical narrative while still having lived in full reality. Not because they disappeared, but because they were not recorded in a way that survived storytelling. The women taken during the Persian campaigns exist in this space, between documentation and silence. Some appear briefly in tablets, some in inscriptions, some in burial evidence, but never as continuous personal narratives, because continuity belongs to power, and power determines what is preserved. Later historians reconstructed fragments. Greek writers focused on battles and kings. Persian records focused on administration. Neither preserved full human perspective. And so modern understanding is always partial, reconstructed from pieces, never complete. But incompleteness is still truth, just fragmented truth. The deeper lesson is not about one empire, it is about all empires. Every large system requires simplification, and simplification removes individuality. To govern thousands, you must reduce thousands into categories: workers, citizens, captives, assets. And once a human becomes a category, their personal story becomes optional. This is how memory is lost without violence, not by destruction, but by classification. Final chapter, what remains? Centuries pass, empires rise and fall, borders change, languages shift, but the physical world retains traces, bones in the soil, broken tablets in ruins, inscriptions carved by people who believed they would be forgotten. And yet they are not fully forgotten, because fragments survive, and fragments demand interpretation. Modern archaeology reconstructs what ancient texts did not preserve. Not to restore the past perfectly, but to acknowledge that it existed in more complexity than recorded history allows. The story of the Greek women taken into the Persian Empire is not a single narrative. It is thousands of interrupted lives. Some integrated, some resisted, some vanished without record. There is no single ending for them, because there was no single experience. Some lineages continued inside imperial systems. Some dissolved into new populations. Some ended without trace. And all of these outcomes are part of history. The most important truth is this: empires do not only conquer land, they reshape memory itself. And memory is what defines the future. Because what is remembered becomes identity, and what is forgotten becomes absence. This is the end of the story as we can reconstruct it. Not because history stops here, but because silence begins. And what remains after silence is not emptiness. It is responsibility. To read carefully, to question narratives, to recognize the fragments left behind. Because somewhere inside those fragments are people who once lived full lives. Not symbols, not statistics, but human beings. And whether they are remembered or not is no longer their decision. It is ours. Epilogue. Echoes in the present. Long after empires disappear, their borders stop moving, but their consequences do not. They continue quietly, in language, in culture, in bloodlines that no longer remember their origin. The ancient world does not end, it transforms. Layer by layer, century by century, it becomes something else. Something modern history is built on. The Persian Empire is gone, so is classical Greece, so is the world of Alexander. But none of them are truly erased. They are absorbed into what comes after. Modern civilizations inherit more than ideas. They inherit structure, administrative systems, governance models, cultural hierarchies, and beneath all of that, ancient patterns of power and memory. The movement of people across empires never stopped. It only changed form. Migration replaces conquest. Economics replaces armies. But displacement remains constant. And in every era, the same question returns. Who gets recorded and who becomes invisible? The women taken during the Persian Wars are not remembered as individuals in most historical accounts. But their existence is embedded in the system that followed them, in populations that shifted, in cultures that blended, in identities that became untraceable. They are not missing. They are dispersed. This is the real shape of history. Not clean lines, not clear endings, but diffusion. Even now, archaeology continues to uncover fragments, a name on clay, a burial without context, a record that contradicts the official narrative. Each discovery does not complete the story, it expands it, because history is never finished, only rewritten, and every generation decides, consciously or not, what to preserve and what to forget. The past does not disappear. It waits beneath interpretation. And sometimes, when enough fragments are gathered, a different picture emerges. Not one of heroes and empires alone, but of people moving through systems larger than themselves, trying to survive within structures they did not choose. That is the final truth this story leaves behind. Not victory, not defeat, but endurance. Because empires end, but human lives continue inside them, and after them, and beyond them. And if there is anything that survives all of it, it is the act of remembering.